may not have a perfect country, but it's the best one on earth. And so, in spirit of that, I'd say we don't have a perfect district, but I think it's the best one in the state. And so I hope that tonight all of us can keep in mind what we have in common, and we can keep any disagreements civil and not attacking in any way. So with that, I'd like to bring up the first person who filled out a card, Paul Calci. Or Calci. Apologize. Calci?
Kelsey.
Calci. I'll get it down one of these days.
Spell that phonetically. Paul Kelsey for the 4105 Emerson. I am here today to question the selection and vetting process. Microphone on. Unelected committees. Microphone.
I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah, can you start over on the time? Oh, there we go. Paul, sorry.
Yeah, I'm here today to question the selection and vetting process that goes into the unelected committees that seem to direct the board decisions. It is very apparent that the unelected committees wield significant influence over board decisions, and I'd like to know what is the board doing to vet members of the committees before they are appointed. Shortly, I'll read some tweets from one of the members of the Pandemic Response Committee, chosen by this board with no community input and tasked with making decisions that affect our children's daily lives. With very little effort, I was able to find this, which begs the question, what is the board doing? The following tweets are verbatim from this individual's Twitter feed. 1. If we believe that we have gotten through life on our merits alone, then we are gravely mistaken, for in our successes were the failures of many before us, # Black Lives Matter. 2. People feel more comfortable looking for something they have no influence over as the reason. It absolves them of any responsibility. Sorry folks, time for them to wake up, realize the role they have played in perpetuating racism, and now do something about it. You don't need them. You are more than those numbers. I don't believe there's a direct correlation with MCAT or US MLE scores in delivering compassionate care to your patients. 4. Masking won't go away anytime soon. Need more folks vaccinated. Plus, maybe a seasonal benefit to mask as we had non-existent flu season and even a significant drop in acute flaccid myelitis as seen in kids in 2020. These are not the tweets of an objective participant looking at all angles of an issue, rather those of a political animal with preconceived set of ideas. My question is, what vetting process, if any, is used to select committee members? Was the board aware of this individual's views prior to committee selection? From the outside looking in, it seems to me these personnel selections are made with an expectation that the committee will come back with recommendations that the board wants, so those decisions are then implemented. What you're doing is using goal-seek behavior, which is finding the input you want to match your predetermined outcome. This is nothing more than providing cover for the board so you can cowardly use the committee recommendations as a shield if said decisions are unpopular and say, oh, hey, these recommendations come from the community, so that's what you wanted. It is a process that allows the board to ignore the wishes of the majority and push through the agenda of a vocal minority. This is not representation, it is a farce. Why would members of the community trust any decision coming from the board when this is how you operate? Maybe you will say these committees exist because the board's resources are limited, so you need to turn these unelected activists to aid in the decision-making process. To that I say, if you cannot do the job entrusted to you as a board member, then quit. You are incapable of leading and do not deserve your seat. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Kelsey. How did I do that time?
Excellent.
Thank you. Next speaker is Spencer Sino.
Hello, Spencer Sino, 4300 Armstrong Parkway. Come here to talk to you about tonight taxes. This board has unanimously voted to raise the property tax on the residents of Highland Park and University Park with the stated purpose to give teachers a pay increase. I believe the board owes the community a clear analysis of why current revenue is insufficient to adequately pay teachers. We're all aware of Robin Hood and the magic pennies, but HPISD spends over $100 million per year on a rapidly declining and, let's be honest, relatively small base of students. Our taxes and your spending increase every year. HPISD enrollment is down, so we're not adding any teachers. So where is all the money going? Well, besides the ongoing cost to maintain and operate an empty elementary school, the debt on which is a separate large line item on our tax bills, we have some clues. Our superintendent costs us far more than DISD's, which has 20 times the number of students. He has 2 deputy superintendents, a chief of staff, and a slew of other administrators at headquarters, almost all of whom are doctors. These aren't doctorates in math or history. They're Dr. Jill Bidens. They literally have doctorates in CRT, social emotional learning, and skillfully ignoring the will of parents and taxpayers. Go look at the curriculum at the top universities offering doctorates in education in this country. We have 2 principals and 4 vice principals at the middle school. Do we have some massive truancy problem at the middle school? Almost all of them are doctors, and all of them pass the buck on every issue. We have a growing police force that we didn't seem to need until we put the doctors in charge. We have a ballooning number of instructional coaches. That's how they code the lower level administrators. The list goes on and on. And what do we get for all of the money that we're spending on these administrators? Well, in addition to CRT, SEL, and masks, the children receive a subpar education. I pulled all 4 of my children from the district this year to a school that never wore any masks, no CRT, and pretty much no administration. And it costs 60% less than what HPISD spends per student. Over the summer, they tested my children who were in AP classes at Highland Park. And guess what? They were 2 grades behind. I don't mean an A student at HP is a C student at their new school. I mean a 6th grader is a 4th grader. I think I speak for most parents and taxpayers that the analysis should at a minimum include total outlays per student per year since at least 2014. Outlays per student should be further broken down into classroom teachers per student per year, which should not include instructional coaches and other facilitators who belong in the administrative spending per student over the time period. The analysis should further include a pro forma for the selling of the Boone School at an estimated fair market value with proceeds applied toward the debt reduction and all current maintenance and operating costs reducing their relevant line items. Thank you.
Mr. Singh. Okay, our next speaker is Tracy Hsu.
Hi, my name is Tracy Hsu. I now live in the city of Dallas, but I lived in the district for over 24 years. 24 years ago, when my husband and I moved our young family to UP, like most people in this room, we made that choice based on shared community values and pride and the excellent reputation of the school district. You all have lost something that previous trustee could always rely on. You've lost the community's trust. Over the past 7 years, I realized why that trust was dwindling. Board decisions and actions have proven that they have no power and no will to listen to the residents they are there to represent. I realized as a taxpayer and a parent, if your views weren't in line with the board, or more importantly, the appointed groupthink committees that advise the board, then your voice didn't matter. I've had numerous friends and old neighbors reach out to me in recent months due to this history, which is why I'm speaking out tonight. Mary Jane, you sold the bond campaign on the emotional plea that it was for our kids, and repeatedly stated that we needed to trust the demographic report. I did my own research back then. Stacy, you and I had many coffees and discussions about it. And I questioned that idea on several occasions at your meetings that you hosted. Fact, enrollment has steadily declined since 2014. Even in this report tonight, the numbers are a little bit hidden because you're including walk-in speech, which are 3 to 5 year olds, and you're also including private school speech, so they're not in the district. We actually declined. It looks like you had a slight increase, but you actually declined by from 659 to 6644. And the elementary picture is even worse. The decline there went from the high in 2714 to from 2733 to 2332 today. So the greatest loss, almost 95% of the loss the district has seen, has been in its elementary students. And Mary Jane, back then, in a facilities report to your group, your committee, former CFO Tim Turner stated that we would need approximately 8,000 students by 2019 in order to meet the maintenance and operation of the district. So you can see we've fallen about 2,000 short of that goal. At the end of elementary first. Boone Elementary right now could sit empty and we would still have room at the 4 other elementary schools for 560 students. Now you're offering and selling residents on a new tax of 4 golden pennies. So, but it's not really a tax because it's a decrease. So we can pay teachers more. The district and you trustees who've served since 2018 have known since then that we have had a teacher attraction and retention problem, and it was a major issue in the district. I sat in on those meetings. I was one of maybe 2 parents to attend. So be honest, HP can't say they care about teachers when they're throwing money out the window instead of unloading the 5th Elementary, removing administrative load, and removing costly big tech. The district has more than enough money to pay our teachers competitively and pay them what they truly deserve. And under your watch, they've not received that.
I would ask that you don't clap, because I think that's consistent with good decorum, but based on recent history, I won't spend a whole lot of time belaboring the point. Our last speaker tonight is Austin Hopper.
Austin Hopper, 3816 Miramar Avenue, HP. I see a lot of concerning things going on in our district. Significant declines in student enrollment within our elementary schools, despite being promised explosive growth, proliferation of tutoring businesses, complaints from parents that their kids cannot write a paper or even a paragraph, declining school rankings and reading scores, complaints that kids are not being taught grammar or vocabulary. One top 10% HP junior is learning grammar from an ACT coach. Ex-HP parents saying their kids were 1 to 2 grades behind when they entered private schools from HP. Well, tonight I wanted to begin a dialogue on the subject of reading. Did you know HP adopted Units of Study by Lucy Calkins in 2019? It was approved for language arts instruction for grades K through 8. Did you know Lucy Calkins' Units of Study was banned in the state of Colorado, the state of Arkansas, and from New York City? Did you know what Joel Klein's biggest regret was during his tenure as New York Education Chancellor? Implementing Lucy Calkins' Units of Study. Why? He said it embraces philosophies of progressive education over traditional instruction. Did you know the NAACP removed Units of Study from Oakland, California because it was harming children? Here's their petition, or part of it, signed by 1,500 people. Did you know a 60-page report was published in 2020 by renowned literacy scholars eviscerating Lucy Calkins' Units of Study? They wrote, it lacks instruction in vocabulary and phonics and encourages reading of below-grade level books. Here's the first page of that report. Did you know countless teachers across the country are horrified by Lucy Calkins' Units of Study because it robs them of a teaching independence and worsens their teaching outcomes? Is that why we spend so much money on these academic enforcers at HP, called instruction coaches? I feel sorry for our teachers who feel they are forced to teach Lucy Calkins, and I want them to know a growing group of parents understands this. We are on your side, the side of these teachers. Schools across the country are sacrificing our children's reading in order to advance a progressive agenda. HP is doing the exact same thing. Lucy Calkins' Units of Study robs our youngest of foundational reading skills and forces our older kids to read books well below their reading level and tries to mold them politically. The best way to describe it, Lucy Calkins is dumbing our kids down and turning them woke. Don't believe me? I'm happy to share a list of books our 8th graders are reading via Lucy Calkins' Critical Literacy. I have the actual books. Come by, I'll share them with you. I'd like to see parents and others in the HP join me and my friends so we can work to put our district back on the right path. Kicking out Lucy Calkins' Unit of Study would be a great first step.
Thank you. Okay, just to make sure there are no other comments? Okay, we'll move on to the next order of business. Turn it over to Edward Herring for recognition of third quarter gifts.
So like every quarter, we want to make sure we recognize those that volunteer to make this district as good as possible, and that entails a tremendous amount of fundraising from in particular PTAs. So I'm going to go by campus and talk about the third quarter so that we're all on the same page. For the third quarter for a high school, or for the district in general, it's $467,449. The largest donation of which was from the sports club. So we want to thank Travis Briggs and Clay Duvall for a $273,000 gift. The Highland Park Education Foundation donated $180,101. I want to thank Michael Denton, his president, and Lauren Holloway for that gift. Moving on to the Moody Innovation Institute, the Education Foundation donated another $181,431 for the Moody program. Again, thank you, Michael and Lauren. Moving on to the high school, we've got a donation from UTD Confucius Institute for $4,000. I want to thank Elizabeth Spiker, President, and Carrie Cothram, President-elect. From MIS and HPMS, $5,698 investment from the Dads Club. I want to thank the Dads Club for their volunteer efforts, and the President, Amy McNulty of HPMS, and Libby Johnson, the President-elect. From an MIS perspective, thank you to Misty Finger, President, and Jessica Turner Waugh as President-elect. Armstrong, I want to thank the PTA for a $22,000 investment and gift, and Susie Kearns is the President, and Jane Wallingford is the President-elect. At UP Elementary, we've got another PTA gift of a little over $5,400. I want to thank Rochelle Mayfield, President, and Stephanie Wilson, President-elect. The sum of all of that donations and gifts is $686,234, which is a recaptured tax dollar equivalent of almost $2 million for the district. So thank you very much for all you do for what we're trying to accomplish here. Really appreciate it.
I'll just tag on. There's some new faces and some new names this year, and we appreciate all your hard work. And there's just no way we could do what we do for our students without all the generosity and hard work of all these different groups, from Sports Club, Education Foundation, and certainly PTA. So thank you very much. Now it's time, I'll turn it over. We have a series of board announcements. I think we'll start with the Pandemic Response Committee, and we've kind of reorganized a little bit to have announcements by committee, so you might get a couple different opportunities to visit tonight, trustees. So I'll turn it over to Jay and Bryce to update the rest of the board on the latest from the PRC.
Thank you, Tom. Pandemic Response Committee report's going to be a little shorter than usual. Bryce join in as necessary or appropriate. First, we had our most recent meeting on September 1st. We plan to meet again this Thursday afternoon. I looked at the district numbers earlier today, and it looks like through right at 4 weeks of school, so 19 days of school, the number of positive cases we've seen have been 4.5%. Approximately 4.5%, a little above that of students, and approximately 5.9% of staff. That's over the course of the 4 weeks, not at any one time. The other report from Pandemic Response Committee are some changes that were made to the back to school plan that of course is published on the district website, available for everybody. Let me see if I can go through those really quickly. I'm just going to flip through the pages and tell you what those changes are. First, each campus has identified a COVID learning coordinator. This staff member will connect with students who are absent due to COVID-related issues and serve as a liaison between the child and the teachers. That's on page 4. Page 7. A couple of additions or changes on page 7. The first is in self-screening under safety protocols. The third bullet reads, volunteers with a family member who has tested positive for COVID-19 are prohibited from volunteering on campus through the incubation period. Vaccination status does not exempt a volunteer if someone in their household is positive. And also on page 7 in the exposure notification section, this is the second bullet. I believe these two sentences are new, and they read, Students and staff members who have been exposed to a positive COVID-19 at school or during a school activity will not be required to be quarantined, but are strongly encouraged to wear face coverings during the incubation period. Students who choose to stay home due to an exposure will be marked with an excused absence due to COVID-related issues for up to 20 days in the year, and these absences will not count against the 10% attendance rule. Page 8, the final bullet point under other precautions now reads, large indoor gatherings and events will be evaluated on a case-by-case basis to determine additional precautions, change in venue or approach, postponement, or cancellation as deemed necessary. On page 9, in the diagnosis and notification procedures, the first bullet point now reads, reentry requirements are guidelines for returning to school. Each campus nurse follows these guidelines to determine when students, staff, and volunteers may return to school after being absent for COVID-related reasons. And the final bullet point on page 9 now reads, siblings of any student or family member living in the same household who test positive for the virus are required to remain home during the incubation period after exposure. Students may return to campus under 2 conditions. The first is it has been 10 days since the date of exposure, or the student has obtained a negative PCR test on or after the 7th day of exposure. And there is an exception identified, and it says that a verified vaccinated child who is not showing any symptoms, he or she may still attend school after being cleared by the school nurse. To page 10, the third bullet point now reads, decisions on when to conduct classes remotely will be made on a case-by-case basis with consultation or in consultation with the Dallas County Health and Human Services Department. And a couple others. It's not as short as I suggested. Page 11, first bullet point. Lunch procedures. Parents with concerns about lunch arrangements should contact their child's campus administrator, and juniors will be required to remain on campus for lunch. And then in visitor protocols, also page 11, any visitor with COVID-19 symptoms should not enter a school. A visitor who has a household member who is confirmed positive with COVID-19 will not be allowed on campus until re-entry requirements are met. The second bullet point in the same section now reads, volunteers who are symptomatic or who have a family member who has tested positive are prohibited from volunteering on campus through the incubation period. Vaccination status does not exempt a volunteer if someone in their household is positive. And I think those changes, if you all recall on page 12, are sort of the 10 bullet points of what sort of the summary. The changes I read are reflected in those bullet points. And that covers it. Bryce, what did I miss?
Yeah, I just have a few things to add, Jay. First of all, with regard to the number of existing cases, we have definitely seen a downward trend over the past 3 to 4 days. I believe today we had 11 total cases out of 6,700 students, so I think that's a positive thing. I think active cases on each campus are maybe a little above 1% down to 0. I know that we're averaging over the past 3 to 4 days between 0 and 2 or 3 cases per campus, so I think that's really positive. I also want to say that the back to school plan reflects changes that were made, but it doesn't necessarily reflect decisions that were made about existing protocols. And so we did talk about 3 things that we did not make changes to that I just want to briefly reference. The first being our existing lunch policy. We recognize that the social interaction of the children is really important. We got a lot of pragmatic advice and recommendations from campus principals on that, and so we left our existing protocols in place. Secondly, the visitor protocol, we talked about that, whether it made sense to suspend that momentarily while case counts are high, but I think everyone recognized that parents really enjoy walking their kids into school and that there's a minimal risk of doing that for 10 to 12 minutes every single day. And then the last thing that we talked about that we did not make changes to is the locker policy. I know that last year the kids didn't get to have lockers and were schlepping heavy backpacks around all day. And we talked to the principals and they said we don't really see any real practical benefit from restricting kids' access to lockers. So I just want to say that I appreciated being part of the committee and hearing some really practical, pragmatic recommendations and advice from principals who, were on the ground, boots on the ground last year.
So even though I'm supposed to be getting off that committee, I've been tagging along, and so I'll just add to that, Bryce. I, for one, have had 2 or 3 recommendations of, hey, why don't we consider A, B, and C? And time and time again, I'm reminded why I'm not a principal and that I don't have a whole lot of experience for what really goes on, because there were some great answers of, hey, what's the negative consequences of some of those things? Whether it be, you name it, whether it be off-campus lunch for more than just seniors, or adjustment to the senior exam exemption requirements. And the last piece I'll say on the whole visitor thing is, I think all of us recognize that at the cafeteria, the visitors are essential to functioning of the school. But one other level of insight that was helpful is when the principal shared, hey, there's a lot more outside of just cafeteria that parents are doing on our campuses on a day in, day out basis. And last year, when that was suspended largely, it had a real impact on the ability for teachers to do everything else they normally do during the day. So I guess that's another kind of roundabout way of thanking the PTA for mobilizing so many hands and feet to kind of help make instruction and education great. And it goes beyond just what happens in the cafeteria, which is huge, but there's a lot that goes beyond that. So like you, I guess, for the benefit of the trustees that aren't in those meetings, time and time again, it's just incredibly reassuring how thoughtful and how engaged and in tune our campus leaders are, and honestly our district staff as well, but our campus leaders really provide an added layer of just practicality, what will work and what sounds good but won't really work. So anyway, so thank you for that thorough report. Okay, I'll turn it over now to Edward for a quick update from the Finance Committee.
Yeah, and this will be very quick because we're in that season from a finance perspective where Mike and his team are really wrapping up the end of 2021, ended August, and so we're in that process of beginning audit field work that'll go on for several months, and then putting the final touches on kind of how we're proceeding forward with the budget. So no major discussions to have on finance at this point. It's kind of that season of absorbing what just happened in 21 and kind of proceeding with 22. I don't know, Mary Jane, if you want to add anything.
And I'll just add that obviously the biggest thing on the Finance Committee is the Golden Penny election. And so I think our efforts over the next 2 months or 6 to 8 weeks is really to educate the community and make sure that they have answers to the hard questions that anyone may have. And so I know that I'm willing to meet with anyone. I know that Edward and Tom as well as members of the Finance Committee, and that is our goal, is just to make sure everyone feels like they're really empowered with the data that they need to be able to make the decision that they want to make. So please feel free to reach out, and I think you'll be hearing more from the district on that end as well to try to get good data points in everyone's hands.
And Mary Jane and Edward, am I correct in saying that there is on the district's website now a whole entire area that's devoted to just information?
Yes, thank you for mentioning that. Yes, for sure. The district's done a great job of putting together dedicated pages under the board tab. There's a Golden Penny selection that you can choose that has a robust, quite a few pages that detail it out. And then to the extent you want more information and want to talk more, we are trying to find opportunities to speak to different groups, and then very available for one-on-ones and small groups to answer any questions. So please reach out.
Thank you, Edward and Mary Jane. Next, I'll turn to Ed Services, Stacy and Bryce.
So I'll get us started today, and I'm going to ask a couple of the people. We had a very robust Ed Services meeting today that most of us were in attendance at. There were 4 key things that we looked at, star data being one of the clear things that we hadn't been able to look at. There was no star done in the 2020 school year. So we looked at a couple of different ways. We looked at 2019 data versus 2021. We looked across cohorts of kids to see how things were going. We actually had raises in terms of went up in some areas. One thing that jumps out at me was 7th grade reading. We had some other areas that came down that we'll look at. Overall, We compared ourselves to region and state, which is great, but also we looked at 5 comparable school districts too to see how we did. We noticed some downward trends in math, but when we dug in a little bit more, there were hypotheses there in terms of, I think the number was, and Lisa, correct me if I'm wrong, 242 of approximately 520 students are taking took algebra that year, which is the highest number we've ever had. Their scores went into our end of course, and we were able to look at some things. There were some other things with STAR data that's coming up. The English language requirements, for those of you that weren't there, have changed considerably. The TEKS changed. In this last year when the STAR test was given, it was a blend of old TEKS and new TEKS. And this coming year, it will be all new TEKS. Those TEKS are much more integrated and blended. Lisa, correct me, what year will writing go away? Is that this year? So the writing portion of STAR, just so everyone knows, is going away, and it's going to an integrated English language section. The other thing is that we were selected, I use that word, selected, to be a test school, a standalone test school for 2022-23 STAR, which even though they said that they would be trying to stay consistent with the STAR test will be moving to 75% multiple choice, 25% what I'll call free response or short answer. So we've been selected to be a test school for that. That will be standalone, so that way it's not intermingling with other schools. So that's something just for everybody to be aware of. We also took a look at early childhood literacy. And I'll stop there for a second. Mary Jane, you're doing evaluation analysis. Is there anything that you or Bryce wanted to add to that real quick? Just you're our person for that.
No, I think you're doing, no, I don't have anything to add. Thank you.
All of that STAR data is posted on our website and is available for individuals to look at any time. Early childhood literacy, once again, changes mandated by state require that we use a new tool for kindergarten and then for first and second, and taking a look across everything, we picked a tool that was consistent across all of them. It's called M-Class Dibble. And long and the short of that is that it is one tool to sort of assess childhood literacy. We used to use Fountas and Pinnell. This test is timed, it's quick, it gives really differentiation data for our teachers. I mean, one of the things that came across to me today was that this test is really for the individual, so you can make certain that you're getting them to where they need to go. We looked at how it went in its first year. We looked at things that they thought went well from a teacher's perspective, and those things that they think need to be worked on is in this second year. It also includes a second dyslexia screener in addition to the Shea-Witt. So now we have Shea-Witt's cast a much wider net, and but this is another tool that can be used as a screener and is being used. Anything that I missed there, Bryce? Okay. Health and PE Proclamation. Part of what we're being reminded as a board is that TE every year has a proclamation for a certain subject or subjects that will undergo completely redone. Proclamation 2022 included health and PE for the first time in 18 years. And basically, they included all these things that have to be a part of that. Human sexuality is a part of that. We're not shying away from that. There are very stringent rules from the state. The one thing that we really want people to know up front is that that will be an opt-in process for all of our parents with their students. So last year they developed a framework to look at it. This year is the year that they apply that framework, our staff, and they basically come up and make sure that we'll meet all the TEKS. It will look across multiple different subjects. But parents will receive information and have already received information for the old TEKS and the parent handbook for the grade.
Is that statewide? Is every single district in the state now going to have a lot more notification about opt-in for all human sexuality? Okay.
Yeah. And where it happens in science or PE, we'll also make sure that parents receive advance notices.
Yeah, science or I think for us it's typically either science or health, right?
And I don't think it'll be in PE, but they've got to take a look at that because PE is being redone. we have a lot of things in place based off of last year's work that was done that we'll need to continue to build on. And finally, Senate Bill 15 did approve remote learning if a school district decides to offer it.
With a lot of caveats.
And I was just gonna say, here's what it's not, because it's easier. What we learned today was that there are a set of things that's not. It's not hybrid. We are not allowed to teach hybrid. That's basically explicitly forbidden. It is K through 12, but if we're gonna do it, and that's if, I say that very specifically, it will likely be K through 6 only. It's only up to 10% of your enrollment. It basically does earn you ADA credit for funding, whereas our parent-led does not right now. But we will not be pulling teachers from last year in K through 4. Basically, we had teachers that were specifically our teachers that were assigned, and there was a lot of moving in and out of those classes, and it caused a lot of disruption. And so we will not be taking an existing class teacher and having them teach remote. So it's still being determined. I mean, I think even up to yesterday, some of the guidelines changed. So Lisa and her team are looking at that as quickly as possible and determining what's feasible. But I say if we do it.
And just, you said there won't be hybrid, and just to be clear, I think last year we used the word hybrid for what we did at the high school, which is A day and B day, but specifically there will be no concurrent teaching. So last year, K through 4, we had dedicated, just as a reminder, K through 4 we had dedicated virtual classes, and just like you said, at the end of every 9 weeks, we had the opportunity for people to change their election, which meant we had people coming in, which means we had to reshuffle, which is something we never want to do anyways, let alone for our youngest students. But what we won't have is the setup we had last year, 5 through 12, where a teacher would be teaching and a student could simultaneously be watching the exact same thing at home. That's actually forbidden by the state, and I think a lot of that comes back. The other thing that we learned today is some of the areas we didn't do as well as we would have liked year over year. Statewide were disastrous. I mean, they're down 30 or 40%. Some of our stuff was down single digits, and we want to address that, and we don't like that. But statewide, I think it was deemed that the virtual instruction really was problematic for a lot of students statewide. And so, and just to your point, we've already assigned sections for all of our people. I'm kind of pointing to the folks that couldn't be there today. So we've already assigned sections with teachers, so we're not going to just take those out and now have to go teach a virtual second grade section. And so we've got some things to work through. A lot of this stuff is literally less than 2 weeks old, coming off the presses from the state legislature. So bear with us, I guess, for people that ask you, just have them bear with us. We're working as fast as we can to figure out what can we do to improve instruction for those who would be interested in this option. And the truth is, there's a chance that it may not be anything more than what we're doing right this second. We just don't know.
And is there any timeline or timetable that was discussed about when we thought we would make a decision, or when we even could theoretically implement if we chose to go that way?
Great question, Doug. That was not discussed today, but I think administratively, we feel the soonest we could do anything, and I emphasize, what Tom said, would be start of the second 9 weeks.
I think that was, I may have forgotten some stuff. Bryce, did I forget anything, or Mary Jane? I went back to my notes.
I think you covered everything, Stacy. I do just want to say real quickly that our students did exceptionally well last year on the STAR, given the circumstances, and especially compared to some of the schools in the surrounding areas. I will say some of the data that was provided was a comparison to Anxiety in Austin and Carroll, and it did look like in 7-8 math that there was some significant differences. I told Lisa after our meeting, I'm a competitive person. I want to be better than Carroll, and Lisa said I'm competitive as well. So I trust that we are going to address that and make sure that we have the most robust 7-8 math program.
Absolutely, and I know they're looking into it. The other thing that we did discuss for the individuals that weren't there is that we did have a number of students that did not take STAR last year compared to normal. And so just by the nature of, one of the hypotheses, what was the hypothesis that you had that you said you all were still needing to test, Lisa?
Well, we had the hypothesis that some of those students who didn't test might have scored well, and so we've tried to look at that. It's not a hard data point, but it's something we've looked at. Also, just looking at the number of students who did take the Algebra 1 EOC or the geometry, or took geometry, so they didn't include in that 8th grade. But there are certainly things that we want to keep looking at, and we will. And the nice part is we have a math committee starting this year to take a look at that. We've been trying to clear that up, and we're excited about that.
So thank you for reminding me of that.
Lisa, quick question, and sorry I wasn't there today, so I missed some of this, but the GAP versus the comp districts, Eanes and Carroll, have we trended that or watched that over years? Is that gap new, or did it?
It is not something necessarily new. I'm not saying it's been exactly the same, and there were places, for example, where we went up this last year and they went down. So it's a little bit.
That's what I was wondering. If you looked at multi-years, does that normally do this, or is there something that is specifically significant about the gap this year that is?
I don't know that
I'm
there
like
was
Bryce,
anything.
I want to win too.
Yeah, I don't know that there's anything specific to this year, no. And we, of course, we do everything that we can to learn from other districts. If there's somebody doing something that's getting them a better result than what we have, we will reach out and try to learn from them as well. But that's one of the things our math committee hopes to do, is to take a look at successful math programs across, not necessarily even just the state, but successful math programs.
Doug, I will say we had 2019 and 2021 data, so and it was pretty comparable. So I don't think you can explain it away from the pandemic.
So the gap existed in 2019.
Exactly.
All right, got it.
And I do want to state that the gaps are small. So some of them, basically before we got to COVID, some of those gaps moved in and out. But it is something to look at, and it is something to see what percentage of their students are taking what classes and what they're, those types of things. Interestingly enough, when you get to end of course, we outscore all of them. So it is one of those things that as we progress along, that was one of the things that when I went home and took an additional look at the data, that when we get to end of course, for every end of course that is offered, we outscore all of our comp districts that we regularly look at. So
And then those gaps in 7th and 8th grade, do they, when you look at then as they become 9th, 10th graders, do those gaps close?
that's what I'm saying, we outscore. Yeah.
You finally get through.
So Stacy, when you say in course, you mean like the top level, whether it be social studies, science, math?
Right, so there are 5 end of courses that have to be taken by every single student that are the equivalent of what I'll call high school star. And so it's like Algebra 1, US History, English 1 and 2, yes, thank you, and Bio. And so in all of those, we end up exceeding our comp scores. And so there's a lot to unpack this year, because as Bryce pointed out, we made some changes in our math goals, and we need to figure out where students are going and what's changed and what impact that had, and then also look at what other things do we need to continue to beef up on. But what I want to make sure people hear on our group of trustees is that when we get to the highest level that you can take on the star, we do end up outperforming our peer groups.
Any other questions or comments on Ed Services? With that, Bryce, I'll turn it over to you. Any report on Ed Foundation or Alumni Association of La Fiesta?
Yeah, so the Education Foundation started its new fiscal year on September the 1st, and we kicked it off with a meeting between the foundation and alumni boards, district leaders, city mayors, PTA and Dad's Club. Here's a picture of Jim Castelaw, Jack Myers, Dallas Cawthorn, and Michael Denton. And it was a great meeting. It was really a celebration of people who are committed to our high school and our school district. And I felt, at the risk of sounding cheesy, I felt really privileged to be a part of this group of people and a part of the leaders of the community that work so hard for our district. We did get to hear a presentation from Dr. Trigg on the VATRE, which was very well received, and Dr. Trigg answered questions from the audience, and I think it was very helpful to everyone who attended. With it being the start of the new year, the foundation is in its budget planning and audit season, along with gearing up for the official launch for MAD for Plaid, which always happens in the last week of October.
This month's gift from the foundation includes funding for the 8 endowed distinguished chair positions at the high school, which you can see on the screen. These include 2 distinguished chairs funded by La Fiesta, 1 for fine arts and 1 for STEAM, and 4 chairs funded by the HP Centennial Dance in the areas of STEAM, fine arts, and cultural studies. Third point is that the Alumni Association has postponed the annual Golden Scots reunion. It was scheduled for September 25th, just in light of what's going on with COVID, and we hope to reschedule that event in early 2022. And finally, with regard to the foundation, the Alumni Association has launched its membership drive, so be on the lookout for the mailer inviting those of you who are alumni to join. With regard to La Fiesta, there are going to be 2 check presentations in the next 7 to 10 business days. The 2020 La Fiesta check presentation will be Monday, September the 20th, 2021, obviously, and then the 2021 La Fiesta check presentation will be September the 29th. And obviously these funds are being donated to the foundation, and we really appreciate that La Fiesta was able to exceed what it anticipated it would be able to give, particularly in such a challenging year. So thank you to La Fiesta.
Thank you, Bryce. I'll just say, quick scan of the endowed chairs. I recognize 3 teachers who are among the very best that my kids have had at Home Park. So whoever's making those selections is doing a good job from what I can tell. So I'll turn it over to Stacy and Kelly for a PTA report.
Well, tomorrow's our first meeting. I'm looking forward to seeing everyone. That's going to be great, especially since we will be able to do that in person. I'll have more the next month. I'm just grateful to be on the journey with each of you again, and look forward to learning so much about your schools and what things have changed and where you've pivoted back, because we really don't like that word, but I figure if we're pivoting back to stuff, I'm excited to hear it. And just thank you for the time and the energy and the effort. I'll have more next month.
Great. Jay, do you have a report from the Dads Club?
Yes, as you all know, the Park Cities Dads Club is the parent organization over 7 different campus level dads clubs, and each of those exist to provide campus level leadership over several important functions: fundraising, volunteering, community building and fellowship, and also benevolence. And they had a meeting of the directors of the Park Cities Dads Club, as well as the presidents of each campus. This took place on August 31st, and I just wanted to thank those leaders for all they do on at the campus level and at the parent organization level. Presiding at that meeting were Michael Denton as the president, Bobby Clark as the secretary, Corby Farrell as the treasurer, and 2 board members, Pete Flowers and Scott Trelock. And attending as their guests were the presidents of each of the campus clubs, and those are Nick Silva, who's each of these is a president. Nick Silva's at Armstrong, Zach Carnahan at Boone, Nick Peters at Bradfield, Doug Kelly at Hiram, Jess Wortman at University Park, David Howarth at the middle school, and Paul Jackson at the high school.
Thank you, Jay. I guess batting cleanup, we'll have Doug with a report on your 3 committees.
Yeah, just a couple of quick updates as each of these are kind of getting revved up with the school year going. First of all, CARE, which is our group focused on chemical awareness and support. So their first fundraiser, their major fundraiser for the year, the CARE Breakfast, is, I talked about it last month briefly, but it's this Monday, September 20th, 8 a.m. in Dallas Country Club. There's a guest speaker who is a subject matter expert and will talk about her book. They will have high school, some of the members of Student Council, True Grit, and Arrow will attend the breakfast along with John Hinton and Jerry Sutterfield. The students will serve as greeters at the door, and they're going to escort guests to the table, and then a number of the students will be recognized for their service to the high school and to the community. So that is at my last plug, I guess, www.care-dallas.com, and you can still register for that breakfast, but it is their major fundraiser, and it is coming Monday. So next month I'll try to bring more information and some pictures along with how that went. And then the CARE staff and volunteers are will quickly turn their attention toward Red Ribbon Week, which is October 25th, 29th. So that will be their next big event, which will be out to the schools involved. So more on that. And then HP Arts, just real quickly, they're just getting a look at what they got through back to school sign up. They received over $34,000 from HPISD parents, and we're very thrilled with that. And then they asked me to mention that for those alumni and grandparents that don't go through back to school sign up, North Texas Giving Day is coming on September 23rd. And that's a chance for any other supporters of the arts in the district to give an opportunity to donate to HP Arts as well. As you know, they accept and grant requests for funding throughout all the different school districts. So that process is really just getting started. They're approved their first funding of 2 elementary school requests. And I'm going to laugh when I say this, but Boone Elementary music teachers requested some boom whackers, which are pitch instruments. So the HP Arts has funded those. And then Bradfield Elementary request was to put on a performance of Exploring Percussion by Mark Shelton for the students. So the HP Arts group have granted those initial 2 requests. And once they get a feel for what comes in from La Fiesta at the end of the month, they'll have a good feel on how much money they have to donate, and they'll get a lot more requests from the schools. So quickly on those 2.
Thank you, Doug. I appreciate it. Now I'll turn over to Dr. Trigg for a superintendent report.
Thank you, Tom. Under the headline of academics, this information is officially embargoed until tomorrow, so I will not be naming any particular students. But tomorrow we will be announcing a total of 31 of our students that will be recognized by the College Board, either as National Merit Semifinalists, National Hispanic Recognition Program Scholars, National African American Recognition Program Scholars, or National Indigenous Recognition Program Scholars. So congratulations to those 31 students. You'll be hearing more about that in the e-news on Friday, if not before. The area of fine arts, we'd just like to highlight our Spotlight Theatrics and their fall production of Legally Blonde, the musical. We have 5 different performances coming up, and I just might mention in particular that Friday, September 24th, I believe, is a bye week for a football team. So if you're looking for something to do that Friday night, head to the auditorium, because it's going to be a tremendous, tremendous experience. I can virtually guarantee that. Ladies Scots Volleyball ranked #1 in the state in 5A, and they continue their stellar play this year. Girls Cross Country won the Kenny Boyd Stampede, and they have had 4 or 5 first place finishes so far this year. We're proud of them. The Running Scots finished 10th overall at the Cedar Park Invitational. Our Lady Scots golf team finished 13th out of 31 teams, but they were the #2 5A team, so congratulations to them. Our tennis team continues to be undefeated. I believe they beat Allen last Friday afternoon, if I'm not mistaken. And so congratulations to them. Football team, if you've been following, went to 2-1 last week, beating Capel 28-13. And Highland Park alum Scotty Scheffler, class of 2014, selected for the Ryder Cup. So we have a number of great things in the professional sports world. Some of us were able to watch one of those quarterbacks just the other night. Was it Sunday Night Football or Monday Night Football? I don't remember which one, but obviously played really, really well. And I understand Clayton Kershaw is going to come off the aisle here pretty soon. I read that in the paper, and hopefully be ready to pitch by the end of September. So we could go on and on about that. A couple of things on consent agenda that I want to mention. There are 2 policies. You spent some time at a work session going through some policies. I want to particularly highlight the proposed revisions to the policies for public comments, just because I think it's really appropriate at this time. A new section was added just to clarify that public is to remain basically behind the podium and not to approach board members during the meeting. Certainly more than welcome to come to the podium during the public comment time when your name is called. Secondly, and I want to read this because it sounds a little confusing, but it really isn't. The current policy states that once the meeting starts, that we cannot and should not accept additional of the gold line cards, and so the public comments would stop at that point. as a board, you'll remember that discussion, we really wanted to loosen that up in case somebody was running late or whatever, and they would still have a time. So what you all came up with was that the public comments portion of the meeting, we would take cards before the public. Let me just read this instead of getting it all tongue-tied. All right. Individuals who wish to participate during the portion of the meeting designated for public comments shall sign up with the presiding officer or designee, which would be Roxana, before the public comments portion of the meeting has concluded, or 15 minutes after the start of the meeting, whichever is earlier. In other words, if public comments go on and on and on, it shuts off 15 minutes after the meeting started. If it's a shorter time frame like it was today, then a person could actually put a card in up until the public comment time was over. So once again, you all did that to encourage public comments and to loosen up the restrictions in the current policy. And lastly, just as a reminder, we did put some examples of disruptive behavior into the policy just to clarify things so people understand what the expectations are. I know our president does the best job he can trying to explain those before the meeting and trying to be sure that there is not disruption. But for purposes of this policy, disruption of the board meeting includes but is not limited to making the meeting comments, demonstrating intimidating behavior, applauding, booing, cheering, or other audible expressions of approval or disapproval of another person's comments. In other words, trying to treat everyone with respect, no matter what their point of view is. So that's just a reminder. Last thing I want to mention in terms of the consent agenda is we have a proclamation for Human Resources Professionals Day, which is September 26th. So Brenda and your staff, we want to throw some honor your way. October is Principal Appreciation Month, and so we want to recognize those campus administrators. And then we also have Physical Therapist Month in the month of October as well, so we'll be recognizing those folks as well. That concludes my report.
Thank you, Dr. Trigg. Do I have a motion?
Not yet.
Oh, sorry, Dr. Trigg, do you have a recommendation for the board?
For the consent agenda, I do. I would recommend approval of the consent agenda as it is published.
Thank you. Do I have a motion?
I move the Board of Trustees approves the consent agenda for the September 14th regular meeting as published.
Second? All in favor? Any opposed? All right. Consent agenda is approved. The next piece I'll just point out for, there's a number of reports provided to the trustees for informational purposes only. The 2020-2021 STAR results summary, the enrollment report, financial report for both June and July, the interdistrict transfer report, Texas Early Reading Instruments for 2020 to 2021, the Texas Public Information Act report, both the one for the end of last academic year and the one for September thus far this year. With that, I'd like to announce that the next order of business is for the board to go into closed session for consultation with attorney pursuant to Texas Open Meeting Act, Texas Government Code Section 551.071, Section 551.072,